On 5 News tonight, Boris's bombshell. May makes her move and Corbyn clings on. The former London mayor stuns his party and pulls out of the race to become the next Prime Minister.
Having consulted colleagues and in view of the circumstances in Parliament, I have concluded that person cannot be me.
His Brexit ally, Michael Gove, is going for the job, but is accused of betrayal after attacking Boris Johnson's leadership credentials. It leaves Home Secretary Theresa May, who campaigned for Remain in the referendum, as the new frontrunner.
My pitch is very simple. I'm Theresa May, and I think I'm the best person to be Prime Minister of this country.
Also coming up tonight, an official report is published into the deaths of at least 7 children in a Bristol hospital. And after the race row at the Oscars, the British stars invited to vote for the awards. Good evening, welcome to 5 News Tonight. I'm Matt Barbett. It's been said a week is a long time in politics, but at the moment it only seems to take a morning for big changes to happen. This time last Thursday, you'll remember, we were voting on whether the UK should leave the EU. Since then, the Prime Minister said he's stepping down, while the Labour leader is refusing to. Today, more shocks. Boris Johnson ruled himself out of the race to become the next PM, despite being the frontrunner. He did it after the man who campaigned to leave alongside him, Michael Gove, said he would run for the top job. The Home Secretary, Theresa May, also confirmed her candidacy as well. Our political editor, Andy Bell, has the full story.
It was supposed to be the launch of his campaign. They were expecting him to say he should be the next party leader. Instead, this.
But I must tell you, my friends, you who have waited faithfully for the punchline of this speech, that having consulted colleagues and in view of the circumstances in Parliament, I have concluded that person cannot be me.
Look at the faces of the MPs backing him. They hadn't expected that. This man sank his bid. Justice Secretary Michael Gove had been at Boris Johnson's side during the referendum and for the leadership. But this morning, in a surprise move, he entered the race himself and later skewered his old partner, damning him with faint praise.
Boris is a big character with great abilities, and I enjoyed working with him during the referendum campaign, when he campaigned with great energy and enthusiasm. But there is something special about leading a party and leading a country, and I had the opportunity in the last few days to assess whether or not Boris could lead that team and build that unity. And I came, as I say, reluctantly but firmly to the conclusion that while Boris has many talents and attributes, he wasn't capable of building that team.
A surprising decision because he said this more than once.
I could not be Prime Minister. I'm not equipped to be Prime Minister. I don't want to be Prime Minister.
Back at what had been supposed to be Boris Johnson's launch, some of his supporters were clearly upset. Others were choosing their words carefully.
We had a team that was really credible and could fight that fight. When bits of that team publicly step away from that, then that makes it harder for us as a team. This was always a team game. Boris was the captain of the team, no doubt, but it was always a team game.
So now Theresa May looks like the front runner. Her campaign launch was before Boris Johnson pulled out, but after Michael Gove had come in.
Did you welcome the entry of Michael Gove into this race? And what do you make of his comments about Boris Johnson, that he decided that Boris couldn't provide the leadership or build a team for the task that's required?
Well, I mean, it's for Michael to comment. He's been working for Boris with Boris for many weeks now, but I welcome an open contest.
Even though she campaigned to remain, she said the new leader must take Britain out of the EU, and she addressed what's sometimes seen as a weakness.
And I know I'm not a showy politician. I don't tour the television studios. I don't gossip about people over lunch. I don't go drinking in Parliament's bars. I don't often wear my heart on my sleeve. I just get on with the job in front of me.
Mr Johnson, have you been done over by Mr Gove?
No doubt he has his own views on that, but for now Boris Johnson has played the game and lost. We don't know who will be Britain's next Prime Minister, but we do know it won't be him. Andy Bell, 5 News.
So, after all of that, who are the official candidates for Tory leader and Prime Minister, and where do they stand? As you've heard, there's Home Secretary Theresa May, a Remain campaigner during the referendum. Justice Secretary Michael Gove, a major Leave supporter. Work and Pensions Secretary Stephen Crabb is another Remain campaigner. While former Defence Secretary Liam Fox was on the Leave side. He stood for the Tory leadership in 2005, the battle that was won, you'll remember, by David Cameron. Then there's Andrea Leadsom, Energy Minister and a prominent campaigner for Leave as well. And here's how they'll be elected. Conservative MPs will vote for their choice until just 2 candidates remain. Then it's up to all members of the Conservative Party to vote to choose their favourite of those 2. The winner, the new leader, and therefore the new Prime Minister, will be announced on the 9th of September. So that's all the runners, but who is backing who? Westminster has really seen such a turbulent week. So I spent the afternoon there and spoke to several senior Conservatives about the leadership race.
I'm Chloe Smith, MP for Norwich North. In the referendum campaign, I supported Remain, and I'm supporting Stephen Crabb now for leadership of the Conservative Party.
Is that a recent decision to support Stephen Crabb?
I've been a fan of Stephen Crabb for a long time, and I think he would make the best Prime Minister. First and foremost because he's well placed to bring the party and the country together. There has, of course, been quite a divisive referendum campaign. The result is crystal clear, and Stephen, first of all, wants to deliver on that result, and he was very clear about that at his launch yesterday. And then, to do so, he needs to bring the country together.
But like Theresa May, he's a Remain supporter, and you've got people like Michael Gove, who are Brexiteers, and that's how the country voted. So surely it should be someone who voted to leave the EU.
Well, I think actually the point is it's time to move on from those camps that existed during the referendum campaign. What's needed is to listen to what the people of Britain have just asked for and deliver it. And that is what Stephen will do. There can be no quibbling about that whatsoever. And he has been very firm about the way in which he wants to do that.
Let me ask you, as a politician of some experience, are you surprised by the actions of Boris Johnson and Michael Gove today?
Well, it does feel a little bit like Game of Thrones is meeting House of Cards at the moment. I think what's really happened is that, there are lots of ambitious politicians in Westminster who have a little corner of their heart that says they'd like to be Prime Minister, but the gravity of the international situation has begun to sink home.
Because you could be running yourself. I mean, you thought about it, didn't you?
I did, and I spoke to colleagues, and I had a very warm response, but people said this is not the time. And I think people are looking at the challenges we face now as a country, and they're saying that we need someone who's got the gravitas to take us through what are going to be really, really challenging times, perhaps the most difficult prime ministership since the Suez crisis. And my judgment is that Theresa May is best suited to do what we need as a country.
Chris, you were front and centre for Britain leaving the EU. Theresa May wanted to remain, so how on earth do you square that?
Theresa's the kind of politician, if you give her a job, she works and works and works till it's done. And the thing about the renegotiation, we've been given a mandate by the public. All of us as Conservatives will deliver that mandate, will deliver the deal that takes us out of the European Union. I'm completely confident that she'll do that.
For the past few months, you've been working closely with Boris Johnson and Michael Gove on the Leave campaign. How do you feel now that they seem to have both stitched each other up?
Well, look, it's for them to explain what precisely has gone on. I have to say, I think I shared everybody's surprise this morning by developments, but hey, that's politics.
That's the Tories. Let's move to Labour now. And Jeremy Corbyn's day has hardly been less stormy. Angela Eagle is the MP expected to formally challenge him for the party leadership, but she's now decided to hold back for a while. Mr Corbyn has been repeatedly questioned about his position. He's also found himself at the centre of a row about anti-Semitism at an event that's meant to tackle anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. Julian Drucker reports.
It's been a tumultuous week for Jeremy Corbyn, and this was only Thursday morning.
Good morning, everybody. Are you up for this leadership challenge, Mr Corbyn?
As it seemed he was just hours from being challenged for the leadership of the party, Mr Corbyn had other business to attend to. He was supposed to be speaking about the inquiry findings into alleged anti-Jewish sentiment in Labour, but he also reacted to the events of the last few days.
We all know that despite the overwhelming mandate that was given by Labour Party members and supporters last year, we've all had a torrid few days. Well, at least I have. Whatever now takes place in our party, politics should be conducted in a decent manner.
Morning.
This is the woman who could make his week even more torrid.
I'll be saying something later today.
But former Shadow Business Secretary Angela Eagle appears to have now delayed her bid to oust Mr Corbyn. Their party isn't a hotbed of anti-Jewish feeling or any other racism, according to the inquiry by civil liberties campaigner Shami Chakrabarti. Mr Corbyn said he'd shortly implement her recommendations.
Mr Corbyn, how difficult is it going to be to change the party, given the problems you're having at the top of the party?
I hope the whole party will come absolutely together, thank Shami for her work and see this as a seminal turning point in how our party behaves and give ourselves a framework to ensure there is no racism whatsoever at any place or any level in our party. I think the party will come together.
And are you the person to lead the party to do that?
I am the leader of the party and I'm doing that.
But before he does that, he's under fire for appearing to compare Israel with IS.
Our Jewish friends are no more responsible for the actions of Israel or the Netanyahu government than our Muslim friends are for those various self-styled Islamic states or organisations.
Then, Labour MP Ruth Smeeth, who's Jewish, was verbally abused by one of Mr Corbyn's grassroots supporters. She stormed out after Mr Corbyn failed to intervene. She's now accused him of showing a catastrophic failure of leadership. Tonight, as Jeremy Corbyn clung on for another day, he issued this online statement. But his defiance was marred by a misspelling of his own name. Julian Drucker, 5 News.
Well then, a little bit earlier on I spoke to Tony Blair's former Director of Communications, Alastair Campbell, and I began by asking him, in his experience of Westminster politics, has he ever known anything like this?
I think the thing that gets closest to it in terms of the feeling of meltdown was probably Black Wednesday, and when Britain crashed out the exchange rate mechanism and all the consequences from that. But I do think it's, I think we're becoming a kind of international laughingstock. A referendum that, in my view, should never have been called, with a result that people didn't really expect. And now, certainly the first time I can ever remember both the main parties having this kind of sense of leadership breakdown.
But you talk about a laughingstock. If Theresa May is now a favourite for the Tories, and Angela Eagle, yes, she hasn't submitted her bid to challenge Jeremy Corbyn yet, but may well do, we could have 2 women leaders in the Commons.
That's possible. It's also the case that we already have 3 leaders in Scotland, 3 women leaders in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, Kezia Dugdale and Ruth Davidson for the Tories. I think that because we're in such what the hell's going on, anything goes territory, I don't think you can predict anything right now. Will Jeremy Corbyn go, as virtually everybody says he should? If that happens, will there be a kind of open contest, or what will happen? I don't think any of us can tell. And likewise, I think the thing Theresa May has to watch is becoming the new conventional wisdom, because I've written a piece for the International Business Times today saying that, often conventional wisdoms are wrong. Well, yesterday the conventional wisdom was Boris Johnson's going to be the next Prime Minister. I never thought he would, and I'll tell you why, because I think he went overnight from being a lovable rogue to being one of the most divisive people in the country. That's now Michael Gove. Michael Gove is now that divisive figure who helped to take Britain out of the European Union. Theresa May is obviously trying to play the kind of John Major, Angela Merkel figure. And I just think that people should, if they really do believe that we need a strong opposition to stop a right-wing Tory government doing the things it might do, then they've got to get involved, they've got to join, and they've got to help us get rid of Jeremy Corbyn. Because, I cannot believe that even Jeremy Corbyn thinks Jeremy Corbyn can be Prime Minister.
Could we see a return to more New Labour kind of politics? Because we hear all sorts of stories about David Miliband waiting in the wings. He might even run in Joe Cox's constituency unchallenged. So is that feasible?
I think that, look, Joe Cox, we haven't even had the funeral yet, and also I don't know what the process is in terms of the national executive and all that stuff. But I certainly think, I'd really like it if Alan Johnson ran. I'd really like it if Hilary Benn ran.
Well, why isn't Alan Johnson running?
Because, these are very personal judgments, and I don't think they want to. I think deep down they feel they do not want to be Prime Minister, and they're honest enough to say that. Just as, the first decent thing Boris Johnson has done is actually to say, you know what, I'm not going to win this. And I think that is actually, the country now is just thinking, God almighty, we've been through this whole thing. Largely, because of one man's ego, and now he can't even make it. It's horrific.
That was Alastair Campbell talking to me a bit earlier on. Well, let's return to Westminster. Our political editor, Andy Bell, is on the green there now in front of the Palace at Westminster. Andy, things still hugely unpredictable for both the main parties. How long do you think this is all going to go on for?
Well, I don't feel like predicting how long anything's going to go on for, Matt, after what we've seen in the last just few hours. But at least we can say on the Conservative side, while it's turned very unfriendly, there is still a timetable and a process. So next week, MPs will start whittling down the candidates to just 2. The election among the membership will take place during August, and we should have a result at the latest and a new leader and a new Prime Minister by September the 9th. So at least there is a timetable there. On the Labour side, though, it's completely up in the air. There are still some people who feel that Jeremy Corbyn may step down. We're waiting for Angela Eagle to launch her bid. That may happen over the weekend, but that is completely open-ended. But it certainly looks as if for the whole summer, both the two main parties, the only ones capable of forming a government in the UK, are going to be consumed by a frenzy around leadership contests. Oh, and by the way, in the meantime, Britain is heading out of the EU.
We didn't forget that, Andy. Thanks very much indeed. One man trying to offer a little calm today was the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney. He says, although the result of the referendum is clear, the effect on the economy is not, and that uncertainty means that the bank will need to make changes over the summer. It could mean a cut in interest rates. Finally, let's talk to Simon Viger in the City. And Simon, what else has Mark Carney been saying about all this?
Yes, Matt, this is all about reassurance that he's got all the bases covered, or as many bases as he can cover, but there is a but. He's talking about uncertainty, insecurity. Yes, interest rates already a record low of 0.5%, may go down this summer to 0.25%. He's cool and he's calm, Mark Carney, but there was a hint of irritation when his pre-referendum warnings of recession were questioned.
What we said in terms of the risks to the economic outlook, in terms of the risks to financial stability, does anyone in this room not think that those risks have begun to manifest? Does anyone in the country think that those risks have not begun to manifest?
So a little hint at the tensions there. He's saying that there is a limit to what we can do here at the Bank of England. The Monetary Policy Committee meets in mid-July. That's when the interest rate decision could be taken. Actually, the FTSE share index is now at a 2-month high after the drops last week. The pound is still down. And in a dig towards the City of Westminster here from the City of London, Mark Carney said, the plan we have beats no plan.
Simon, thanks very much indeed. Still to come on 5 News Tonight. After the deaths of 7 children, calls for a nationwide review into intensive care for young people. And the new plan to stop the Oscars being so white. We're discussing that after the break. Welcome back. You're watching 5 News Tonight. The parents of a 4-year-old boy who died after heart surgery at a children's hospital in Bristol have hit out at an official report. Sean Turner was one of 7 children who died after treatment at the Royal Hospital. An independent review had found that patients were regularly given poor care and parents were let down. But Sean's parents have told Dominic Reynolds the report is a whitewash.
Horrendous. It's just your worst nightmare as a parent, seeing your child in so much pain.
Sean Turner suffered in the days before he died. His mum and dad believe it didn't need to happen, that Sean should still be here. They've waited years for today's report into the unit where he was treated, but now they've read it, they say it's a whitewash.
We just can't take it in. Why 2 years has been spent and they've produced this? It still doesn't go far enough. It's not making people accountable for allowing that ward to be that unsafe. And that's all we wanted.
The review into cardiac care at Bristol Children's Hospital was centred here, Ward 32. Looking at the deaths of 7 children in particular, it found that problems here put patients at risk of harm. The review's made 32 recommendations. They include making sure staffing levels are adequate, reviewing how staff communicate with families about their child's diagnosis and about what's likely to happen afterwards, And it's also called for a nationwide review into paediatric intensive care units like this one. But the language in the report isn't damning. Its author describes much of the care as less good.
Well, less good is a bit of a shorthand, isn't it, for all sorts of failings that parents told us about. Things like alarms not being responded to quickly, things like medication not arriving on time, things like fluid balances not being accurately charted, and in particular, a concern that staff didn't have the time and the space to reflect on what was happening.
The hospital's boss, still in his job, says his resignation wouldn't help.
We put in a huge range of improvement, millions of pounds invested in new medical and nursing staff, new facilities and equipment. I think the important thing is that I lead the team now to implement the recommendations of this report and ensure, convince ourselves and the families who've been party to this report that those recommendations have been taken seriously.
But Sean's mum sees it differently.
He needs to step down.
You want him to go?
Absolutely.
Yeah. This unit has spent a lot of time under scrutiny. A public inquiry 15 years ago found major shortcomings. Today's report is less critical, and Sean's parents say it's left them let down by the system again. Dominic Reynolds, 5 News in Warminster.
A woman who wants to use her dead daughter's eggs to give birth to her own grandchild has won a court appeal. The 60-year-old woman says before her daughter died in 2011, she made it her wish that her mother carried her babies. Danny Sinhar's with me now. Danny, this is highly unusual, fascinating as well. What's the background to it all?
It is an extraordinary legal case, and it involves a woman who effectively wants to give birth to her own grandchild using her dead daughter's frozen eggs. Now, her daughter died of cancer back in 2011, and she'd already decided she wanted to freeze her eggs. She claims, or her mother claims, that she'd asked her to carry her babies. And last year, the UK fertility regulator, they said they wouldn't give her permission. What the mother had intended to do was take these frozen eggs, bring them to a US clinic, and then get them fertilised. But this really is a case that's been dragged through the courts. Last year, the mother actually lost a High Court case. Okay. And that is because the really boiled down to one main point. They couldn't be sure that, proper written consent had been given by the daughter. Instead, the mother claimed verbal consent had been given.
OK, so what happens next then?
Well, today, a change of tune because the Court of Appeal said the case should be reviewed. It will now go back to the fertility regulator. They've been asked to look at the case again. There are various issues and quite serious considerations to be made here. We've been speaking to a professor of medical ethics to see what some of them might be.
The primary one is the ethical issue. Did this woman give consent or not? From my reading of the case, she gave consent, ethically speaking. Legally speaking, did she sign the right forms? That's a legal issue, and that's up to the lawyers and the HFEA to decide.
So it all depends what the UK fertility regulator decides to do next. As far as the grandmother's concerned, she wants to carry out her dead daughter's wishes.
Danny, thanks very much indeed. They are the people who decide which films and which stars win Hollywood's biggest awards. But after a row about a lack of diversity among this year's nominees, the Oscars committee has now invited a new intake. Among them, hundreds of non-white stars, including British actors Idris Elba and John Boyega. Millie Stevenson has more.
3, 2, 1.
This year's Oscar nominees posing for their official photo. A sea of white faces. And behind the image, anger. When not a single black actor was nominated in the major categories, it dominated the ceremony inside.
Man, I counted at least 15 black people on that montage.
And out, where we filmed this protest. The Academy promised to make the Oscars less white. Those were the words, now for the action. Announcing their largest ever intake of new members, Idris Elba is one of hundreds invited to join their voting panel. Star Wars actor John Boyega, also one of those chosen. Today he said he hoped he'd spark a change. Almost half of those newly invited to join the Academy are women, including Brits Emma Watson and Kate Beckinsale. But how much of a difference will it make? Well, at the moment, there is a panel of over 6,000 Academy voters. Nearly 700 more have now been invited. If they all accept the offer, the membership would still mostly be white, male and over 60. Male voters would slip from 75% to 73%, while white members would still make up the majority, going from 92% to 89%. Akua Jamfi set up the UK's first database to represent black actors and says this is finally a step in the right direction.
It's a start. It can't just end here. We've added some non-white people in, so that's it. This has to continue. We have to see the results. Does this make a difference? Does there need to be more? Does there need to be a bit of a colour at the top even more? Lots of things need to be discussed post this decision, but this is what I'm enthusiastic about, is that they've listened.
The Academy say they want to open their doors wider. When next year's nominees are revealed, we'll know if they have. Minnie Stevenson, 5 News.
Let's get the view now. Film critic Mark Eccleston, who's with me. Good move.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you know, about time too, quite frankly. I mean, this is an organisation which is 92% white, 75% male, and 86% of them are over 50, which in itself is fine. You know, they're probably nice people, but it does not reflect the diversity in the world. And this is an organisation which speaks hugely to the world.
Yeah, the biggest film awards going.
Yeah.
So is it imperative they're a little bit more open with what they do and how they decide who wins what?
Well, they should always decide who wins what based on who's the best in all those categories. But I think I'm not going to say that they are racist. I really think this is completely wrong. If you look at this statistic, this is unbelievable. If you have 15% of ethnic minority actors in the top roles, 15% of them are recognised with a nomination at the Oscars, and 17% get a win. So actually the Academy are positively discriminating towards the winning actors. But in the general population, this is America, between 2007 to 2013, it is 37% of people of colour. So it is the industry which is not giving them the roles, and the Academy can only vote on what is presented in front of them.
Yeah, you've already mentioned the makeup of the Academy, which is thousands of people, 6,000 people, something like that.
Yeah.
This isn't going to make a huge dent in the demographics, is it? It's not going to lower hugely the male membership and the non-white membership.
No, it's not. I mean, there's kind of 700 here versus 6,000. It's going to slip it by about 2%, but it's moving in that kind of direction. What needs to happen is people have to vote with the box office. Their ticket is a vote. And what's happening now is people say, let's not have a black actor in this film because we don't think it's box office. I'm not saying they're being racist, but they're making bad commercial decisions.
Okay.
And if it begins to turn in the favour, then everything will be tidied up.
Mark, many thanks. All eyes on the Oscars and the nominations next year, of course. Right, that is just about it from us for now. Sian Welby will be here with you weather next, and Danny is going to be back with updates throughout the evening on Channel 5. For now, thanks very much indeed for your company. See you again tomorrow, 6:30, of course. Bye-bye.